Buenas tardes, gracias por acompañarnos. Bueno, si hace 17 años nuestras madres, abuelas, hermanos y las organizaciones no gubernamentales que trabajan en derechos humanos tenían una imagen, yo creo que esta tarde es una de esas imágenes, un parque lleno de gente, una sala llena de gente, trabajando y pensando en nuevos proyectos sobre cómo avanzar en los derechos humanos, en la memoria, en el arte. Esta era, no tengo ninguna duda, una imagen que surgió hace 17 años. Y fuimos construyendo una película y todos los días, todos los que trabajamos acá en el Parque de la Memoria, cuando llegamos y abrimos este espacio, sentimos una gran responsabilidad, sentimos un gran compromiso por la lucha, por este monumento a orillas del Río de la Plata, por todas las ideas que pensamos que tenemos que desarrollar, por los artistas que se nos acercan día a día, por el público, por los familiares. Así que hoy es una tarde para nosotros especial, reúne muchas cosas, reúne el talento, la creatividad, el arte, no sé, el homenaje, un montón de cosas, así que realmente les agradecemos mucho. Yo quiero, ya a título personal, en primer medida, agradecerle a todo el Consejo de Gestión, algunos miembros hoy están acá, otras nuestras madres, abuelas quizás, todas no han podido venir. Ay, por suerte está entrando Laura también, gracias Laura Conte por acompañarnos, y otras madres. Porque no solo han luchado por este lugar, sino todos los días se preocupan, nos apoyan, nos impulsan, nos dan ánimo, nunca están cansadas, nunca tienen ningún problema y nosotros vamos atrás de ellas con ese espíritu. A Graciela Casabé le quiero hacer un agradecimiento personal, que la tengo acá, porque no sé, hace un año, no sé cuánto, me contó este proyecto y me dio mucha alegría que me sumara desde el inicio y se lo agradezco realmente a título personal, porque para mí fue una alegría volver a trabajar con ella, es un desafío, es aprender todos los días algo. Gracias Graciela, te quiero, sos una maestra en esto y todos hemos un poco aprendido de vos. A todo tu equipo de BP15 que han trabajado muchísimo y que han confiado en el Parque de la Memoria para tener 4 eventos de esta Bienal de Performance. Así que desde ya también están invitados el miércoles a los 2 eventos que vamos a tener, una inauguración de la exposición y la performance de Fernando Rubio. A mi equipo, que son todos unos jóvenes excepcionales que han trabajado con el equipo de la Bienal, codo a codo, y que son los que abren y cierran todos los días este parque. Para mi equipo pido un aplauso, en serio. Para 2 empresas, 2 empresarios, para Time for Fun, que dijo sí de entrada cuando queríamos a Laurie, nos apoyó, nos ayudó económica, logísticamente, a mi amiga Mónica Kucher de Arqui Madera, que siempre cuando levantamos un teléfono, ella está del otro lado para el mueble, para el asiento, para la silla, para todo lo que necesitamos. Y bueno, yo no tengo más nada que decir, ahora van a hablar ella y Pablo Shanton, que también le quiero agradecer, con ustedes Laurie Anderson y Pablo Shanton.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes. Vamos a tener que ponernos estos aparatitos. Si no, entiendo que debe estar funcionando todo perfecto. Bueno, es un lujo tenerla, Laurie, acá con nosotros, por supuesto. Yo voy a hablar siempre en español, digo, para no hacer esto de tener que traducir mucho, Vamos a hacer un poco como la telenovela turca, ustedes van a estar viéndonos a nosotros, pero se escucha otra voz. Pero la voz va a decir la verdad de lo que nosotros vamos a decir, porque son excelentes traductoras. Y por supuesto que vamos a tener que romper el hielo de la forma más difícil, porque estamos en un lugar muy importante. Yo le había dicho a Laurie que vamos a hablar de la memoria, porque estando en el Parque de Memoria vamos a empezar así. Pero la suerte es, si todos vieron el show que estuvo haciendo en el ópera estos 2 últimos días, empieza con una historia que ella cuenta que se llama The Beginning of Memory. Tenemos el disco, ¿no? Homeland. Digo para que sepan en qué disco está. A veces hago esta cosa medio didáctica, pero está en Homeland, que es un disco del 2010. Soy periodista, digo esos datos, es un plomo, pero ayuda a ubicarlos. Y la historia, que es hermosa, la del comienzo de la memoria, es que es un lugar donde todavía no hay suelo, no hay tierra, y habitan los pájaros. Entonces están los pájaros volando, siempre en círculos, sin estar en el aire, no hay suelo, pero uno de ellos se muere, y se le muere a una alondra. Entonces tienen que decidir dónde enterrarla a la alondra, porque no hay suelo donde enterrarla. Entonces estamos en un lugar tan fuerte como como el Parque de la Memoria. Yo pensaba que el tema acá sería distinto, porque tenemos el muerto en realidad, o sea, tenemos dónde enterrarlo, pero no tenemos el muerto, porque el desaparecido es una figura muy compleja. Entonces, tenía ganas de empezar hablando un poco de esto, ¿no? Que la historia sería invertida. En este caso, no está el muerto, pero ¿cómo hacemos en este caso, como para enterrarlo, ¿no? Como la idea, ¿qué hubiera sido de esa historia de los pájaros?
Well, habeas corpus, yeah. So I think this story, first of all, combines the idea of memory and death. And of course, I think those are intimately connected. We can make this a little bit quieter, I think. Or do I have this on like that? Okay. Thank you. This is such an intense park, so beautiful. And I've been walking around and looking at all the places. And can we make it a little bit quieter, the microphone, so it's like not feeding back so much? Okay. I'm a wirehead. I can't help trying to make work with sound. Okay. Well, so a little less feedback would be so good. Okay. So sorry about that. Okay, good. All right. Thank you. So we'll work on that. But also it's a very beautiful place here in the park, and a beautiful and tragic place. And so I tried to remember something about sadness that my teacher, whose name is Mingyur Rinpoche, he's from Nepal, and he's a meditation teacher. And actually, we can't find him now. He's went away 4 years ago to meditate in a cave, and we don't know where he is. So anyway, we miss him very much. But he left a lot of things for us to think about, and one was, he said you should practice how to feel sad without being sad. And this is more difficult than it seems, how to feel sad without actually being sad. There are so many sad things in the world, and if you push them away, they'll come and get you, you know. So he's just saying, be open to feeling it, but don't be sad. You don't want to be a sad person. There's too much sadness already, so try not to be sad. I'm very sad about this feedback. Can we work on it a little bit? Yes. You see, I'm a control freak, kind of. Always trying to control the situation. I want to say a word about, should we stop for a minute while we try to fix it? Okay, good. Maybe you would like to. I want to say a word about the song that you mentioned, called "The Beginning of Memory." It comes from a play by Aristophanes called "The Birds," and it's just a little footnote. This story about the birds. He said, "Yeah, this story reminds me of the lark." And I'm reading this play and going, "What's the story about the lark? I'm not an ancient Greek person, so I don't get the reference." So I'm doing some research. What's the story about the lark? And that's when I found it's a story about death. But anyway, the play itself, if you haven't, how many have read The Birds by Aristophanes? Okay, good. This is great. You have something great to check out. This play is hilarious. It's a comedy. It's a tragic comedy. And of course, it features birds in many ways. And of course, why would you have a play about birds and memory? Birds don't have much of memory, you know. So anyway, the play begins. Two poets are walking out of Athens, and they're very depressed. And they're like, Athens is full of such posers and such, frauds, and it's so boring in Athens now. So this is like, 200 BC or something. And so they're walking along, and they see some birds. And one of the poets gets an idea, and he goes, "Okay, you birds, come down. I have an idea, and for something." And the birds are, what? Because they can't focus on their birds, And so he goes, "Let's get all the birds of the world together, because I have this great idea." And so finally, they get all the birds of the world to come: starlings and pelicans and dodo birds and owls and robins and so on, and they all come. And he says, "Okay, listen, you birds, I have a really great idea." And the birds are, "What? They can't focus. They're birds." So he says, every time the gods have come down to Earth to grab some human being, they come down through where? Through your territory. And let me ask you a question. Do you charge them any money when they come through? I say, "No, we don't." And second, when the humans are making a sacrifice and they're burning the bull or whatever, and the smoke goes up, may I ask you again, through where? Your territory. And again, do you charge any money? And the birds said, "No, we don't." I said, "You are missing a huge opportunity." So anyway, they're like, he said, "You need to build a wall." And the birds are going, wait a second, who is this? I mean, we're birds. We do not work, we just fly around. We're birds, and free, free as a bird, sort of this kind of thing. And he said, "You need to build this wall between you and heaven. And every time this happens, they come down or go up, you charge." And anyway, so the birds are like, what? So anyway, it's a very complicated plot, and I'm going to leave it to you to read the play and see what happens in this play, because it is very, very, very funny. It's about the mind, and it's about the wall between us and them. And for the Greeks, of course, it was a different sort of situation, because for them, it wasn't like a Christian sort of heaven. It was the gods are up there, and they're almost childish. They're jealous and stupid and stealing things from people. And meanwhile, the Greeks, the humans, are the ones inventing algebra, geometry, tragedy, comedy, physics, and behaving in a world of law and justice. So the heaven and earth are flipped in this world. So building the wall, in this case, in this play, is something that has some interesting consequences. So check out the play. It's really quite beautiful. I think we solved this sound thing. Thank you so much. I'm sorry about that.
Después es inevitable hablar de otra de tus canciones relacionadas con la memoria, que es The Dream Before, que está dedicada a Walter Benjamin, porque ahí de algún modo trabaja una de las... Walter Benjamin, digamos, el gran ensayista alemán, especialmente de la primera parte del siglo XX, que tiene, tiene varias tesis sobre la filosofía de la historia, y la novena es sobre un ángel, y está en el disco Strange Angels, que por ahí también lo podemos mostrar. En este disco está The Dream Before, y lo que es interesante es que en The Dream Before aparecen Hansel y Gretel, ¿no? Los dos del cuento. Pero Hansel es el que cuenta la tesis novena de la filosofía de la historia de Benjamin, que fue escrita en 1940, muy poco antes de que él muriese. Y lo que es interesante es, ahí tenemos unas imágenes de ángeles, ¿viste que yo había traído? Es que, para que veamos la imagen, a ver, hay una de, la de Graham Budget, porque esa se ve bien. El tema es que, digamos, el ángel de la historia es llevado por la tormenta del progreso, pero él está llevado por la tormenta, pero sigue mirando hacia atrás, hacia el pasado. Fíjate, la vas a encontrar ahí. Es esa que está el ángel y hay una explosión. Esa, así está bien, así se puede ver. Ese es el ángel de la historia, que, digamos, está siendo llevado por el progreso, que es una tormenta, pero sigue mirando las cosas que sucedieron en el pasado. Eso es muy interesante porque la idea del progreso es que hay que olvidarse del pasado, en realidad, y estamos en un lugar, en realidad, que nos está diciendo eso. Podemos progresar, pero sin embargo tenemos que seguir viendo las catástrofes que hubo. Incluso en la canción también lo dice, hay debris over debris, o sea, digamos, hay como si fuera capas y capas de ruinas y de restos, ¿no? Entonces esta idea está aplicada en una canción. Sería bueno que desarrollaras un poco más esta idea de el progreso, pero en realidad sin dejar de mirar el pasado.
Well, I think that song, like a lot of the ones I make, is a kind of duet, a conversation. So there's always at least two ways to look at it. So you have Hansel and you have Gretel, and and this is quite a sad couple. There, no, I think Hansel and Gretel is a German story, right? Do you have Hansel and Gretel? Yeah. Yeah, I know them. Yeah, so this is the sad aftermath later when they're sitting around thinking about their past as little, fairy tale creatures, and now they're living in Berlin, drinking a lot, and just thinking about when we used to be so cute, and everyone was, And anyway, so they're always having this relationship to their past. The past of their stories, because Hansel is complaining that he had to just live out his story, and it was such a stupid story, and he wasn't even in love with Gretel anyway. He was attracted to the witch, and so anyway, they're arguing about this, and the point of the argument is to establish 2 points of view in something, so that you're always looking forward, looking back, and it's I've just finished a movie called Heart of a Dog, and in it it's a movie about stories and how to tell stories and how they get made and how we get stuck in our stories and going forward and backward. It's also a subplot of the movie is surveillance and the collection of stories by, at least in the United States, we have the National Security Agency that collects all our fascinating emails, and I don't know why. We don't really know why they're collecting them. Control, of course, So anyway, the thing about these stories is when you construct a story, you really need to know where it's going. This story of looking back or looking forward, you need to know the structure of the story. My favorite attitude towards that is Godard, who said every story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, just not necessarily in that order. So that most stories, the story of your life, let's say, do you have a story of your life? Does it have this narrative arc? Or, you try to impose one sometimes on your life to make it have some sense but we're not living a movie or a novel. It's much more random than that. You learn different things. You run into somebody, it changes your life, and you're going another direction. When you're collecting information like the National Security Agency, you're collecting random parts of people's lives, little bits of things, almost the way our mind collects things, just here and there. And then it's only when you commit a crime that the story is reconstructed backwards. So when you commit that crime, they go, okay, he went to that website, he bought that, he read that, he did that, he did that. I'm sorry to say she did that, she did this, she read that, she bought that. And they see, it seems to make sense that that crime was committed because it's all leading up somehow. Do things lead up to events that way in your life? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So this idea of progress, that things get better, always seemed completely, it seems absurd to a lot of people, that there's this sense of getting better. I think overall, if you're going to think of evolution in terms of getting better or making progress, you could say that the modern horse is faster than the prehistoric horse, more efficient, that we are more resistant to disease than our ancestors, that we live longer than our ancestors. We are not. If you had to say, to talk about progress and evolution, you'd have to say that we are not, in fact, sliding down the evolutionary scale, becoming more and more simple, becoming creatures that are less and less complicated until we end up single-celled little things crawling around on the floor. No, we are going the other way. We are becoming more and more complex and more specialized. So if we call this progress, which I do, because it moves towards the light, then yes, I would say that there's some kind of sense of development and progress and becoming, let's say, having a greater understanding of the world, and to be in a place like this park also gives me that feeling of like, okay, I can. It is not like a park. We were talking earlier about other places that have memories, like a Holocaust museum, which is so heavy. You see the pictures of all the children, and then you see the piles of shoes, and it will tear your heart out. And it makes it a very visceral experience of what happened to these people, what really happened to these people. And now it is in this park, it has a level of abstraction that I think helps people understand and go into the future with more hope, and that is the point, that you're not just dragged down to the, so that you, through these endless lists of names and the direction and the way it's moving and suggesting evolution through time, I think it has a very a direction that's upward like that, and leads to our absorbing it in our minds as well as feeling it. I hope I'm sticking to the subject.
Yo te voy a estimular para que vos hables. Vos contás las historias, que es lo que queremos escuchar. Yo te tiro ideas. No, hay una canción de la que me gustaría hablar un poco sobre el tema de esa canción que a mí me encanta, que me emociona mucho, se llama World Without End, que es una canción que está en Bright Red, también podemos mostrarlo si lo encontrás en Bright Red, está en un disco del 94. Esa canción a mí me emociona especialmente porque hay como un pedido que se le dice: mundo que no tiene fin, world without end, remember me. Esa es otra idea de la memoria, ¿no? La necesidad de no ser olvidado. Y como en el cuento de los pájaros, del que antes hablábamos, finalmente la alondra lo que hace, como no tienen dónde enterrarlo al pájaro muerto, que creo que es la madre de la alondra, lo entierra en la nuca, ¿no? Y ahí empieza la memoria, que terminamos teniendo como de alguna forma algún muerto en nosotros que nos recuerda todo el tiempo ese pasado que uno está olvidando o a esa persona que está olvidando. Entonces lo que me encanta es que esta idea de que uno a la eternidad le piden: recuérdame. O sea, uno finalmente es un elemento muy pequeño en una eternidad, es un episodio intrascendente en la eternidad. Me gustaría hablar un poco de esta cuestión, del miedo a ser olvidado, ¿no? Que también es otra parte de la memoria, porque finalmente uno es lo que los otros recuerdan de uno.
one of my favorite books is called Sum, and it's, I'll remember the author in a minute. It's dropping out of my mind right now, but it's called S-U-M. And in this book, there's a little quote of this idea of, they say that you die 3 times. The first when your heart stops, and the second when you're buried or cremated, and the third, the last time someone says your name. And so in terms of memory, I think those kinds of things are more important to some people than others. For me, I am not ambitious in that way, I don't think. You know, I am, sorry to get this off here, that maybe I'm secretly like that, but I don't think so. I mean, my goal as an artist is to often to really escape the parameters of my own self, or whatever I've constructed to be some version of me. And this is why in the performance that I was doing here, there are many of those stories are about this attempt to escape. So you know, you build your, especially for artists too, but for everyone, you know, you build your personality or your style, and then you do your style, and you repeat your style, and then when you don't do your style, someone goes, get back into your style. You have to, like, or if you say something out of character, let's say, your friends go, that's not you. You know, you should be more like, why are you doing like that? And so, as if you had to do it, like become some kind of product, or because you are, you know, you become a recognizable sort of Facebook stable personality, and we're not like that. You know, we're changing all the time, so you don't really have to, like, so it becomes oppressive to try to have some kind of continuity. You know, to me, it's more exciting to be able to just do something completely different than you ever did before. Why are you trapped in this story that's you know? So these stories that I was telling are kind of like adventure stories, and they're ways to get out of that trap, or my attempts to get out of a trap. I don't think I've really succeeded in that, but I tried to get out of that, and I tried to do that in ways that were just very simple, to just put myself in situations where I didn't know what to do. I wasn't like, you know, didn't know what to say, didn't know how to act, didn't know how to walk, anything. So, for example, this thing of working in McDonald's, for example. And so that was something I wasn't particularly able to do, but I could figure out some ways to do it. Another story that I was telling here was about this Amish farm, working on an Amish farm with a couple. And one thing I didn't say in that story, which really struck me, was that I wanted to go to this simple place where people didn't have email, they didn't have anything, they didn't have phones, they didn't use technology. And I thought, I'm going to see what a simplicity is. And so, in fact, the people there who were farming were, it was raining a lot, and they were really depressed and having long arguments. I mean, they were really depressed. But they couldn't say that because they were supposed to be so good, you know. So they were literally choking on their own goodness. You know, it was so frustrating. I thought, get me back to New York where people can just go, get out of my way, you know, come on. You know, no, they couldn't say that. They couldn't say it. So I want to like, so these stories actually were some attempt to try to be in a situation where you act like you feel. You don't have to, like, be an actor in some play that somebody else has invented or something. So, I mean, it ends like that anyway. You often get into these roles, and that it can also be a playful thing. It can also be fun, but these were attempts to escape from that so-called reality, and along those lines, in terms of being a consumable item, which is, in a way what this is about, I want to mention one of my favorite books that I've been pushing lately, by Tom Hodgkinson. He's a British writer who writes about, he has a magazine called How to Be Idle, and he has a lot of books about how to escape this anxiety, this world of anxiety that we live in. And he says things like, well, that big important meeting you have at 3 p.m. today where you have to present your new idea, and he said, blow it off. Just don't go. Why don't you just go down to the lake with your friend and have a beer? And you're like, no, I couldn't do that, but he shows you the reasons why that might be a good idea. It might be a good idea to just try that. Anyway, it's check out his books if you like, or just look around at some of those ideas, because they're very, very helpful. I'm finding them very helpful as an artist and as a person to think of the world in a less oppressive way,
Bueno, me das pie para que hablemos de otra cosa de la que quería hablar, que es cómo entra la autobiografía en tu obra. O sea, cuando usás la primera persona o contás historias, no siempre están totalmente relacionadas con algo que realmente pasó. Y cuento esto. El sábado pasado, mi papá tuvo un ataque por lo cual no me reconocía, se había olvidado de mí, un problema. Y entonces, cuando todo eso ya pasó y fue solamente una subida de presión, puse el disco Bright Red Again, y entonces de nuevo, y escuché World Without End, el tema anterior. Y hay un momento en la canción que la cantante, que es Laurie, dice: cuando mi padre murió, lo pusimos en la tierra. Cuando mi padre murió, era como una gran biblioteca que se había quemado. Bueno, ahí tuve que apagarlo, por supuesto, al tema, porque estaba muy conmovido por lo que me había pasado, y además la idea de que cuando una persona se muere es como una gran biblioteca que arde, es una cosa que me llega especialmente. Pero después me enteré leyendo que tu padre estaba vivo cuando escribiste eso. O sea, dijiste, when my father died, pero tu padre estaba vivo, el real, el verdadero. Entonces me parece que es muy interesante que cuentes esto, porque en muchos reportajes estuve leyendo que vos repetís: nunca estuve interesado en ser autobiográfico, nunca estuve interesada en autoexpresarme a mí mismo. Siempre preferí hablar del mundo y mostrarlo de una forma. Contanos un poco cómo relacionás y también los momentos riesgosos, ¿no? Porque decís, cuando mi padre murió, digamos, y lo decís vos misma, es una cosa bastante fuerte. ¿Cómo mezclás ficción con la autobiografía?
My father was very surprised about that too. He was like, I'm feeling well, thank you. But no, he understands this very well. Those of us who are writers are not always telling you our personal stories, but just, combining things that we have. And also, I come from a family where there are lots of stories. For example, my grandfather, his story was he came from Sweden when he was 8 to the United States, and by himself, and then he began a big horse business with lots of horses when he was 9, and he got married when he was 10. He was a liar, It's like, he didn't do any of that. I mean, okay, so he made this big story of, he's the wonderful hero, probably, and we don't know. I mean, he was speaking Swedish, so he's probably from Sweden. We deduced in our detective work. But probably the story was a sadder one. Probably he was a runaway. Or maybe like a lot of kids in Sweden at that time, their fathers are beating them and he runs away. Or maybe he's an orphan and his parents, something like that is more likely the story, really. But that's not the story he could tell us. So he told the story he could tell. And so I think that I tend to use stories from my own life just because it's a convenient thing, and also you can avoid libel that way. You don't have to worry about telling somebody else's story. So I use my own life in many ways, but not always. And so I think every writer has that situation. Karl Ove Knausgaard, I don't know if you know him. He's a Norwegian writer, and he wrote a book called My Struggle. Somewhat unfortunate title since he shares it with Hitler. You'd think he'd think of another title, but no, it's called My Struggle. And My Struggle is the story of just his very boring daily life in a small town in Norway. And it's completely fascinating. It's nothing happens in this book. No, it's just he tells you where he bought his shoes, and then he goes to have a drink with his friend, and then he feels self-conscious about pushing a stroller in the street, and you're like, okay. But I don't know why it is completely fascinating. And last fall, I went to play a concert in this small town in Norway, which actually was a very cool festival. It's called a Punkt Festival. And it's like you do an improv session with another musician, and then there's a mixer there on stage also, and he's sampling your music as you play. And then as soon as you're done, you leave, and he plays his music made up of your concert that you did 1 minute ago. It's really a wonderful way to use technology and music. Very, very exciting. But the point about this was that everyone at this, it's a very kind of wirehead geeky sort of thing, sort of electronic music and sampling. And so it's a men's world. So I was the only woman in the festival, and practically the only woman in the whole audience. It was sort of strange. But what was so great about this was that all of these people there, all of these Norwegian guys, I felt I really knew them. I knew where they'd gotten their shoes. I knew what they had said to their grandmother that morning. I knew about the stroller. I knew them, And it wasn't that they were trying to be, fictional or anything. It was just like their sort of real stories were there. So, and I know also, I said, some of the people there were his friends, and I said, how do you feel about being in his book? And they were like, he didn't really get my story right, that wasn't really me, So it's like a friend of mine who's a little bit vain, and every time he passes a mirror, he looks at it and he goes, not bad, but not me. So anyway, yeah.
Antes hablábamos de cómo entraba tu persona o tu biografía dentro de tu obra. Ahora hay otra cosa que me interesa muchísimo, que es el modo en el que entra la política dentro de tu obra, que eso es muy interesante. Siempre tratás de dividirlo y decís, yo no quiero decirle a la gente qué es lo que tiene que hacer. O sea, ¿cómo se evita ser didáctico? Que es un gran problema. O cómo ser periodístico y al mismo tiempo decirle qué tiene que hacer. Y leí una entrevista donde decías, porque yo tampoco sé lo que hay que hacer. O sea, por un lado, podés ser activista o estar con el Occupy, con el grupo Occupy. Eso forma parte de tu vida como militante, en todo caso, o como activista. Pero a la hora de que eso pase a la obra, es muy distinto. Vos decís, yo trabajo con emociones, con imágenes, con colores, es otra situación. Contanos un poco cómo ves esa diferenciación, cómo hay que hacer esa diferenciación también, que es muy interesante.
I think the easiest way is to just become a good observer, because that's really all I'm trying to do as an artist, see things as they are, not as I hope they would be. So it's a kind of journalistic response to the world, and so sometimes that becomes somewhat a political thing, sometimes. So, but those lines are difficult to draw occasionally. Now, sometimes I step over it because I need to. And here's an example of this. I recently did a festival in New York, which was an art festival, but also humanities. So I was happy about that because I could then maybe extend some of my thoughts about certain things for example, recently, a friend's brother-in-law was assassinated by an Iraq vet. This guy came into his office, and he didn't know this guy, and he just killed him. Now, there are many people like that in the United States now who have been in the Iraq War, and they come back, and they're quite crazy. They're quite crazy, and there's just running around, and there are lots of, they're killing people in movie theaters, and they're just really, they're out of control. So I had this idea of a kind of reverse boot camp. Now, boot camp is basic training for the Army in the United States, and it's about 6 to 8 weeks, depending on the branch, the Navy or the Army, in which you learn how to kill someone. So now, in World War II, 44% of the Army, the US Army, was able to get a gun and kill someone. In the Vietnam era, they tried to get this number up, and they got it up to about 70% of the Army could point a gun and kill someone. Now it's much higher because you just push a button. We do war by remote, we do war with technology, and it's quite easy to just boom. Now, it's not totally easy, so that when you come back, a lot of people have post-traumatic stress syndrome, and they are, they're really, they're kind of a mess. So this idea is to have at the other end of military service a period of time, exactly the amount of time where you're trained to kill. In this reverse boot camp period of time, you're trained to just drop the gun, and you're helped to get a job, for example, because post-traumatic stress syndrome means that you're unemployable. So not only did you have a horrible time in the Army, you can't get a job, because if you admit that it was difficult, you're crazy. So you're not supposed to say it was hard. You're supposed to say, oh, it's nothing. So this idea is based on the fact that we can learn things, and we can learn other things. So I am very aware that the United States government will never do this, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea to propose it. So we, in this festival that I did a few weeks ago in New York, we had a number of people from the military and also from mindfulness groups discussing this proposal. And so we're trying to get some legislation to move that into the realm of the possible. It will be impossible to convince them to do this, but like I said, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't suggest it, because it makes sense. So now other so as you mentioned, I'm kind of queasy about including this as my actual work. I have done work with other topics of having to do with political prisoners and prisoners of crime, and those have been they had to do with other aspects of things. For example, I'll tell you a story of one project which had to do with this. I was asked to come to do a sound installation in a place in a small town, Krems, near Vienna. And this was a big church, and it was originally a 13th century church. Then it had become a flop house for pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem, and then it became a cultural center. This kind of arc of usage that is, similar to a lot of places, cultural center. So they said, I was there for several days, and it was a big, reverberant place, and I couldn't think of any project with sound, because it was all it was a mess, So one day I walked up to the bell tower, and I looked into this, over at this town, this perfect little Austrian town, and in the middle of this perfect little Austrian town was a maximum security prison. I was like, whoa. Usually we put prisons somewhere else, up the river, somewhere else, it was right here. And then there was a guard in the guard tower, and he had a machine gun. So I'm standing in the bell tower, he's standing in the guard tower, and we're like, so I come down the bell tower, and I say to the curators, I would like to do a work on telepresence, and we're going to build a video studio in the prison, and we're going to have the prisoners sit very still for a long time. We're going to make a life-size cast of his body and put the cast in the apse of the church and beam the image of him live and wrap it onto this three-dimensional cast of his own body. And it's going to be about the focus of telepresence in our culture and the attitude towards the body of the church and the prison. So incarnation and incarceration, there and not there of the body. So anyway, surprisingly, the curators go, okay. I was like, really? Are you sure? So anyway, a couple of days later, they said, we can't do the project. Why? Because in Austria, the prisoner loses the rights to their own image. And they no longer own it, so you can't have it. So I was like, a version of the Austro-Hungarian Empire had thought of this thing, 150 years ago or something like this. You won't own your own image. That's clever. So I was relieved, really, because I thought, is it a good idea, really, to put a prisoner in the apse of a church in Austria? Maybe not. So then 2 days after that, their attorney general said, our attorney general loves your idea and you can do it. I was like, uh-oh. I was on again, off again, on again, off again. So eventually they decided not to do it because they were a little bit nervous about this. Then the Whitney Museum in New York asked me to do a project, and I proposed this, to do it with Sing Sing prison. This was in '99, and so I said the person in prison will sit like this, and we worked for months with Sing Sing. We found the warden and the prisoners, and many of these guys are in because of a Rockefeller drug law, which means that if you have a joint of marijuana, at the time when they were getting these guys in, you're in prison for life, That's a Rockefeller drug law. So they swept up all of these guys, swept them up, and they're in prison. So anyway, I was working with some of those guys, and to train to sit still. And that was all going well, and then right at that time, there was a lot of information about the privatization of prisons. We have 1 in every 100 Americans is in prison. It's the highest prison population in the world. Outside of New York City, in New York State, the main economic base is prisons. It's a prison state. We don't like to say that, but it is. Now, of course, New York City is the economic capital, and it overwhelms the state. The state is bigger, but poorer, and New York is smaller, but very rich. So, keep in mind that that is the case. So anyway, we were trying to make this work, and it was a work called Life. And finally, the board of directors of the Whitney said, we feel it's too political. And of course, the privatization, it coincided with the huge number of prisoners was not the result of a huge number of more bad guys around. It's the privatization of prisons. So when you make prison a business, what do you need? Customers. Just like those birds, Anyway, you got to make it pay. So it's all about money. So they said, not a good idea to do that project. And I was like, okay. So anyway, the story's almost finished. A curator named Germano Celant at the Guggenheim Museum in New York, I was telling him about this project, and in 1 hour he said, I have the prison, and the cultural institution. So we did this project in Milan with the Prada Foundation Museum and a prison called San Vittorio Prison. And the way it worked was, so obviously the biggest problem with something like this is the issue of exploitation. You're going to be my artwork, okay? Is that okay with you? You know, I'll sign my name on the project. And, you know, it's absurd. So I spent a lot of time at the prison in San Vittorio in Milan talking to people about what this was. Now, this is a maximum security prison, but it is a white-collar prison. So all of these guys in the prison were corporate weasels. They had dismantled the Italian economy. They were very, very smart. They spoke Greek and Latin. They were lawyers. They were able to have knives. They could have wine. They were writing their plays and their books, and they were wearing Armani, and everything was right except the shoes, because the shoes were not Armani shoes. They were not going anywhere ever. They were wearing slippers. So they were in for life. There was no parole. For life. So I'm talking to these guys, these lawyers, about my collaborator who was going to be sitting there for several months being teleported into a museum. So we're talking about this situation, and I'm saying, you know, I'm looking for a collaborator, not really just, you know, and because they're lawyers and because they're skilled at manipulating you and your consciousness, they're moving me slowly over until I'm just in their lawyerly way, just like in court, until I'm talking to one guy. And they had decided who I was going to collaborate with. You know, it was just a fiction that I was deciding. So I'm talking to this one guy, Santino. Santino is a bank robber and murderer. He murdered some people on his way out of the bank and in the robbery. And also a wonderful playwright, wonderful smart guy. And I said, Santino, if we do this, how do you see this project? And he said, I see this as a virtual escape. And I said, you're my man. So we did this together, and it was a really powerful project, but very different than I thought it was going to be, because, you know, there he was sitting in the Prada Foundation in real time, all day, sitting there for several months. And he had trained himself to be very, very still. And he wrote some beautiful things about this also. But he, you know, you could go like this in front of his face, you know, because he was there and not there. It was like, you know, your distant father. You're kind of going, Dad, are you there? He said, no, I'm not there, I'm not there. So he was in the corner of a huge room, and he did not look like a prisoner. He looked like a judge. He had this incredible sense of corporeal being there. And this is why I'm trying to make this a long story, because, you know, being in this park with so many of the absent people, you know, I feel that we do so many things at a distance. You know, I know that we do that in the United States for sure. And so I wanted to make this more apparent. And also, the other aspect of this was just simply the time. The time that real time is very different from fictional time. If somebody is sitting there all day and you're looking at him and he's a projection, but he's not in your space, but in your time, it can be very, very intense, because we're often used to fictionalized, dramatized time. And we're very, I'll give you an example of that. And the example goes like this. and so on. You know, you're not in this thing of forward and back and forward and back. You're just like, ooh, this is so uncomfortable. But I think also you forget sometimes how many skills you have that you don't use. And one of them is this feeling of like being in the present, which we're very good at. And we used to be maybe better at it, you know, because it's harder to be in the present now. But you can, for example, let's say you're in an elevator and the person behind you, you have this kind of feeling there's something not good about the person behind you. And you have this feeling in the back of your neck, like, ee. These are like our great primitive ancestors gave us these things. And so I think it's really important to not to be too intellectual and to sometimes just be super physical and realize that your body is telling you not everything is right now. I don't know why. So instinct. Anyway.
Yo te voy a hacer una pregunta más directa ahora, ya no tanto al artista como a la ciudadana de los Estados Unidos. Por muchas de tus obras hemos sabido cuál era tu opinión, de alguna forma, en forma de obra de arte, sobre los años de Reagan, sobre los años de Bush, que hemos visto acá incluso. Pero, ¿cuál es tu balance sobre los años de Obama?
I think what happens, and I think it happened to him as well, you're elected, and then it's all, yay, I won, okay, great, okay, good for me. And then I think somebody takes this person into a room and says, you think you won the election? We're going to tell you who's in charge here. This is not you. So I'm not holding these guys, you know, so responsible for it. You know, once you construct a system, it's very hard to get out of that, and it is not so much a democracy as, you know, as a very large corporation dedicated to making lots and lots of money. That's it. That's really it. You know, capitalism has triumphed. And it sometimes disguises itself a little bit as democracy, but you know, it's a pretty sad disguise. It doesn't work that well. So I try to look at those kinds of things in my own culture, and that's one of the reasons that I did a lot of things with Occupy, and we also designed a group called Occupy Art, and we got to do some very simple things with that. One that I was the happiest with was a performance of the Phil Glass's opera Satyagraha, and at the Met, and this was really a wonderful evening. It was Satyagraha is the story, of course, of civil disobedience and Gandhi, and his whole what happened to him, and so. I thought, well, I wonder what it would be like to focus on this, not as the story in an opera, but as what does civil disobedience look like in New York tonight? You know, with Occupy Art, because it was, or the Occupy movement was always being crushed by, you know, and the whole idea of civil disobedience was being taken care of very quickly, just, you know, just dispersed. So we had an event at Lincoln Center. And imagine the evening. It's a cold December night, and everything's very sparkling, and Lincoln Center is like really lit up and gorgeous, and all of these opera goers are coming out of the opera. They've seen a wonderful opera about civil disobedience, and our event was, we had announced that it was going to happen, so they come out of the opera, and the entire Lincoln Center is surrounded by police, and it's like. And a bunch of Occupy Art people, me included in them, is there ready to do this event. And so they're like, whoa, what is this? So we had arranged with Phil Glass to come and read part of the libretto of the opera. The opera is in Sanskrit, so he fortunately was able to put it in English for us. But he read it, so he came out and joined us in this big group surrounded by cops. And the opera the libretto is very, very beautiful, and it was read in Occupy style. So Occupy sound system is people repeating what the speaker has said, as you know. So one person says this, and then the outer ring says, Steve says la 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 la, and then Steve says la la la. So it goes out in concentric circles of people repeating this so everyone can hear. So that was how this text was delivered, and it was a hair-raising moment for me, because it was basically the words of Gandhi coming through the words of many people who have practiced civil disobedience. And the words were something like, when your government breaks, when your government breaks, when your government breaks, what do you do? What do you do? Do you just stand there? Do you just stand there? Do you just stand there? Or do you stand up and say something? Or do you stand? It was really, I thought, I felt like part of a big, like a stone is thrown into the water, and it moves out through the culture. And I was very happy to be part of something that did that. Now, does it change much? I don't know about changing the world. Like you said, I'm very hesitant to. Actually, I like the world like it is. With all its craziness and people just pushing and we will, at some point destroy ourselves and disappear, but, we'll be back, in another form, probably, So when somebody says, do you want to make the world a better place? That's the scariest question for me, because I think, better for who? Better for me and my artist friends? Better for who are you even talking about? So when you start moving like that, I think for me, it's always been better to just try to make something that I feel and understand, and try to make it, say it as simply as I can, or clearly, and make it as clear as I can. And that's that, rather than trying to make sure that everyone agrees with me and we change things and it's so much better. And, I realize that often ideologies such as my own can be even more dangerous than things like belief structures or religions or other situations, because, you can get very intolerant. A friend of mine just gave a lecture that I liked very much, and he said, you don't think you're an ideologist, but let me give you, here's some questions I'm going to show you, and I'm going to see what your answer is. So we'll see what your ideology is. Now, I'm a liberal leftist American, so that's my profile. So I'm looking at these questions, and the statements, let's say. One statement is, the United States spends more money on defense than education. And I'm like, of course, we do. And he says, okay, do you want to know the real statistics? The United States spends 5 times the amount on education as defense. And I'm like, what? And it's true. But because I'm in that ideological group, I'm critical of this kind of thing, I'm ignorant of the actual situation. So I try really hard not to identify so much with a specific group, and just try to find out, try to be a good journalist, try to see what it is, not what I think it should be, or what I'm told that it is. So his work is a guy named Timothy Ferris, who wrote a book that just came out called Beyond Belief, which is a very interesting book about kind of who you think you are, So I found it fascinating.
No puedo dejar de preguntarte, ¿estás cansada? ¿2 temitas más? ¿2?
Of course, yeah.
Bueno, porque después vamos a hacer algunas preguntas. Voy a entregar el micrófono. Pero no podía dejar de hablar de un tema que es, el lenguaje del futuro, es el nombre de Language of the Future, es el nombre de la antología, de alguna forma, que trajiste a Buenos Aires ahora. Y lo que es interesante es que, ahora que está este disco lo digo, The Language of the Future es una de las historias, una de las piezas que está en este disco, que este es el vinilo. Está bueno que mostré, ponlo de nuevo. The United States Live, este es el vinilo, pero en CD son 4 CDs, y ahí está la historia que se cuenta en The Language of the Future. Y en The Language of the Future aparece un personaje que es una chica de 15 años que está en un avión y esa chica habla todo como en idioma computacional. Estamos en el año 83, ¿no? Esto se está grabando en el año 83. Y la chica todo lo ve así, como que su amor es digital. Dice, bueno, mi novio está on, mi novio está off. Ella todo el tiempo está hablando como, bueno, ella no escanea, como cuando dice que no entiende, discúlpame, pero no escaneo. Ella habla en todos esos términos. El tema es que esto es 1983, o incluso antes, porque esto se compuso antes. O sea, piensen que ese era el language of the future. Pero ahora nosotros estamos en ese futuro. Todo el mundo habla así. ¿Cómo te sentís en ese mundo que viste ahí, que era una chica de 15 años en un avión, que te imaginaste y toda esa historia? Ahora estamos en medio de eso. Mira, te cuento en un subterráneo hace poco. Tinder, ¿conocen? Que es una forma de levantar gente que se hace por un teléfono. Había dos chicas hablando en subterráneo y una le decía a la otra, yo cliqué, el off. Yo cliqué, el off. Yo flasheé roces después. Flasheé roces, esto es difícil de traducir. Hallucinates, ella como que alucinó que se iba a encontrar con alguien, pero por clics nomás, que se parece a... ¿Cómo te encontrás vos ahora en eso que antes era el futuro, ahora es el presente? ¿Cómo te encontrás en ese lenguaje del futuro?
Well, that was written that was a song about a plane crash, and actually a story about a plane crash and meeting someone who was talking about the future, and a lot of these, a lot of the stories around that time were actually about plane crashes, and and this kind of techno language that explains tragedy and can explain anything, actually. But anyway, I'm just thinking back on that because the song "Oh Superman" was also written at that time and was also about a plane crash, and it was inspired by this attempted rescue in the what is a war that's still going on, the Iraq War, but at that time it was called something else. It's had about, this war has had 25, titles, let's say. And so that particular rescue was, there were a number of hostages that had been taken. And so we were going to go and rescue them, and this dramatic thing with helicopters going to come into the desert and drop down and pick them up, and and the fact, what happened was the helicopters zoomed in, found them, and then crashed and burned. And it was, so these were songs about basically technology is not going to rescue you. And it, so this digital future that was being invoked had a lot of inevitability and sadness in it as well. I remember when I was, I don't often sing songs again because I'm not an artist who's doing that, although this is an interesting project for me to be doing an anthology of stories, so I appreciate the opportunity that the festival has given me to do this. But I did this song, "Oh Superman," I guess 2 days after 9/11 in New York City. And people are going, how could you write that song about what just happened? American planes, here they come, or something, all of these lines about disaster and technology and planes. And I think it's really because I don't actually believe in the future, and that to invoke it is, I mean, to say that we're living in the some kind of future is such a fiction. We're barely able to understand how time moves, and so it's always the future is usually one that's economic. If you get a better car or a better dress or a bigger house, that will be the future, and in that future you'll be happier. And so it's always has happiness attached to it. So that's what makes me suspicious, about like sometime in the future you'll be happier. Probably not. You know, probably not. You'll probably be about the same as you are now. But, you know, in order to sell us things, you know, they have this idea of the carrot in front of you that sometimes it's going to be better than now. So that's why I often use the future as a kind of foil for ideas.
Bueno, por mi parte, para ir cerrando, como se suele decir, además es de noche afuera, ¿no?
Yes.
Lo que más asombraba cuando viniste en el 90 era todo el trabajo multimediático. O sea, la artista multimedia que venía a Estados Unidos y ponía toda la... Y ahora, cuando vemos el espectáculo que trajiste ahora, era velas, silla, violín, micrófono. O sea, era muchísimo más austero. Y lo que era también, de alguna forma, en aquella época mucho más gracioso, que por ahí la tecnología era todavía una novedad, incluso tu uso del vocoder, o a veces cuando hacías algún tipo de danza robótica, era como que se consideraba, eres una mujer que se atreve a la tecnología en la música. Hoy día todo el mundo es tecnológico, ¿no? O sea, ya desde un celular hasta lo que fuera, estamos todos tecnologizados. ¿Pensás que en este caso hay que hacer al revés? O sea, digamos, tenemos que empezar a simplificar un poco la situación, ya no esa cosa como que ya vivimos en un mundo que está hiper mediatizado, hiper todo. Entonces, por ahí lo que hay que hacer es simplificar.
Well, I think it's interesting to go in all sorts of different directions. I love to go to things that are, you know, maximal technology. You know, it's great to see shows like that. This particular show that I'm doing here with candles and, you know, a chair and so on is because there's so many images in the language. It's like words. You know, I feel that it's more interesting for people to use their own imaginations than to have some pictures that tell you what to think about those words. I would feel differently if it wasn't so word heavy, but it's very word heavy. And so, you know, for example, if I just forget something really abstract, if I use something very concrete like the word dog, say the word dog, every single person in this room has a different dog that springs to mind. All these dogs are going to look really different, and you're going to have different feelings about dogs. And, you know, some people are afraid of them, some love them, some are just like courageous little dog. You know? So, using those and using the people's imaginations to amplify what the text is, for me, is really exciting. It's more of a collaborative situation than a show, you know, here it is. I mean, I like those too, so I'm not saying it's great to abandon technology. We're kind of stuck with technology, and a lot of people are doing great stuff with the language of texting and what was it, roses? I flash roses. I flash roses.
Ah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful, beautiful, machines make beautiful poetry, beautiful. And so I think it's going to be, I mean, I don't have any idea what art is. I don't. And so I wouldn't say we should go away from technology or anything like that. I mean, just do what you want, do what you feel. You know, I don't know which way it's going. It can go lots of ways, you know, so.
Tendría que dar el micrófono a ver si hay alguien que quiere hacer alguna pregunta. Sí, ya, bueno. Okay.
Como fue tremendamente generosa con nosotros, Laurie, vamos a hacer 3 preguntas del público y les pido que sean específicos y concretos con sus preguntas. ¿Quién desearía hacerle una pregunta? Acá, a ver, Graciela.
If you also just have a comment too, that's okay. It doesn't have to have a question mark at the end. Okay.
Tengo una anécdota y una pregunta. En el año 1998 yo era la curadora del auditorio del Museo de Arte Moderno y un empleado que estaba los domingos había aprendido a viajar por tu CD-ROM de Puppet Motel. Entonces hice una función con público, navegando por ese formato ya inexistente que es el CD-ROM interactivo, el juego. Y cuando bajo para ver si estaba todo listo en el auditorio, el que estaba primero en la puerta era León Ferrari, que estaba esperando entrar. León Ferrari, probablemente no hayas oído hablar de él, pero es un artista que ganó la Bienal de Venecia, un hombre fantástico, iconoclasta, que ya murió, un artista genial, que debía tener cuando hizo esa cola alrededor de 80 años. Así que para mí fue fantástico que él fuera uno de los espectadores y nos divertimos muchísimo. Yo quería hacerte una pregunta respecto a tu recital último, donde yo vi una cierta estructura, porque comenzaba con el Génesis, con los pájaros, y luego había algo de Apocalipsis, pero también estaba el mito del eterno retorno. Hablabas de volver, que es un país que necesita volver a nacer, a renacer. ¿Qué nos puedes decir de tu idea de la trascendencia ahora que has perdido a tu ser amado? ¿Qué sentís con respecto a eso?
Well, transcendence, I don't think I'm transcending anything, you know, but I have learned some things about that, I think, and Lou and I came up with a series of, with 3 rules for living that I'm going to share with you because I find them helpful. And they're just how to do some things. So the first one is, don't be afraid of anyone. And if you can imagine living your life not afraid of anyone, that's what I'm talking about. Second is get a really good, I don't know if you have these bullshit detector, and learn how to use it. You know, when someone is like, rah, rah, and you go, oh, okay. Learn how to use it. And the third is to be really, really tender. And with those 3 things, you don't have to transcend anything. You're set.
Gracias, Flor. Laurie, primero quería agradecerte por las elogiosas palabras para nuestro parque y por tu gran luminosidad, y hacerte una pregunta sobre un pensamiento que leí en un reportaje que diste, que más o menos dice lo siguiente. Decías, Lou Reed me pedía que hable en forma directa, y yo le respondía que prefería hablar con metáforas. Esa discusión nos acompañó siempre. Esa es una frase que extraje de un reportaje. Quería saber si podías contarnos brevemente alguna anécdota, algún pensamiento de esas charlas entre ustedes. Gracias.
Well, I think it's always interesting to try to see what your method is. And when you talk with another person who tries to write a song or tries to write a story, you realize you're approaching it from very different ways. So with the 2 of us, we were helped each other in a lot of ways, but more he helped me in terms of how to say things more simply. And it wasn't that I only use metaphors, but I do like them because they have, I don't know. I don't know why I like them, because they're beautiful, you know, and I don't always want to say things so directly. So I didn't want to defend myself against, you know, you know, the crime of the metaphor. You know, I think metaphors are completely lovely, but I do have this feeling of trying to move away from comparison. And when I was working at NASA as the artist in residence there, which is a super strange job, I got to talk to a lot of nanotechnologists there. And we talked about a lot of things because they had a lot of time to talk, unlike the engineers who are always busy and in a rush and too late. So the nanotechnologists are like the philosophers of NASA. And so I realized that, you know, that artists and scientists like that had a lot more in common than I thought, because they do the same thing we do. They make something, and then they see, does it work, you know, and what is it, you know, they watch it, it's the same thing. And they have the same problem also at the end, you know, how do you know when it's finished? And in order to know when it's finished, you have to know what you're making. What are you making here? So otherwise, when is it done? I don't know when it's done. What is it? So anyway, they often cited Einstein in our discussions, and they said that Einstein had rejected a number of his most well-known theories. Why? Because they weren't beautiful. Now, what does that mean to a scientist, that it's not beautiful? And what is that relationship to, let's say, true or something like that, or verifiable? So I was thinking about that a lot, and thinking in terms of some of the things that Einstein said about beauty, for example, symmetry. And now you take this idea of symmetry, and it's quite a strange one, and it is metaphor as well, but it's two things, and one thing is like the other thing. Very Western idea of what makes things beautiful. This thing looks like that thing. That makes it better. Why? We don't know, you know, maybe we have two eyes, two legs, a bicameral brain, that makes it better, that this rhymes with this, June rhymes with noon, or whatever. Now you take this idea of symmetry to Japan, and it's considered a little bit idiotic. What? This looks like that, that makes it good? Why? Why? You know, how about just one thing, like the haiku? You just have one image. Cloudy day, the puppeteer says, ooh, that's it. The puppeteer doesn't look like something else, it doesn't remind you of something else, it's just the puppeteer, all by himself. End of the story. So I like this feeling of a single intense moment that doesn't have to look like something else to be justified. So because of so my interest in like simple language and metaphor is, I go back and forth, because both worlds are quite beautiful. Both worlds are, because memory is about being reminded of something. So we live in images that we're always comparing to another one. Oh, you remind me of that, and so you step into the big flow of time when you're using situations like rhyming situations. It can be a building that is very, very symmetrical, or it can rhyme with something earlier that happens in an earlier time, or you can think of two things in a different way, and they can be relating through time or through like a catalytic relationship. One thing influences the other, and so it looks just like the other. So there are lots of ways that metaphor can work, and other than just this similarity, you know, twinning aspect.
Bueno, un último comentario o pregunta. ¿Sí?
I hope it's easy.
Sí, yo quería saber cómo fue el encuentro con Trisha Brown cuando hizo la música de Set and Reset, como que me interesa esta combinación de música y danza y bueno, y cómo es la comunicación como de los intereses de uno y del otro, cómo se fue como conformando esa obra que hasta el día de hoy se está presentando, a pesar de que sea de los 80. Y bueno, gracias por todo, ídola total.
Okay, so the collaboration with Trisha was, she is, first of all, I wanted to work with her because she's a very old friend, and it's completely about joy. You know, it's not about like, I mean, dancers call their what they do their work, you know, but it's not. It's really with Trisha. It's completely about this pleasure and also abandonment, because she said, you know, I want to make something about falling, and I want to make it in this most natural way possible. And so I was very attracted to that because I'm more and more interested in fun. And I'm just going to end today telling you about something that, a concert that I did that was the most fun that I've ever had. And it was, because thinking of Trisha reminds me of like, just, let's make something that's just like, whoa, fun. So I know that sounds shallow a little bit, but it's okay. So this story starts out in Rhode Island School of Design. And I was giving a commencement speech to the students, and I was feeling extremely guilty because, first of all, it was a very hot day, and that makes you feel pretty awful anyway. And wearing one of these mortarboard hats, you know, and sitting in the green room just like waiting to give my speech, and hot and bored. And the speech was supposed to be, you know, encouraging the young artists to don't worry about your student debt. You can wipe that out right away. Don't worry about that. You know, I was like, ugh. And don't worry, you'll get a job in the art world like that. It'll be so easy, you know. And so I was feeling quite guilty about being this, you know, fraud. And so I'm waiting, and Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist, is also there, and we're talking to each other and blah blah blah. And I'm saying, you know, I sometimes when I'm doing a concert, I look out and I imagine the whole audience is dogs. And he said, that's my fantasy too. I said, are you kidding? He said, yeah. I said, okay, whoever gets to do the concert first invites the other one. And he said, okay, blind. Okay, so we're like, so he has a more complicated schedule than I do, so I got the chance to do it in Sydney, Australia. And so I got to bring all of my favorite playwrights and be the curator of this festival, and playwrights and musicians and painters and writers, and I got to just say, come and be part of the festival. And so I was talking to the producer of the festival when we were planning it, and I said, and also I want to do a concert for dogs. And he didn't say, concert for dogs? No, he just wrote down concert for dogs. So I was like, okay. So we did a concert for dogs in Sydney, Australia, and it was so much fun. I wrote it with very pretty high frequencies, although the dog trainer that I'm working with says, don't go up super high because you don't know what's going to happen in a big concert for dogs. We had this concert, and I thought a few hundred dogs would show up. Thousands and thousands of dogs showed up at the concert. We started it with an invocation for whales, because we're right in the harbor in Sydney. That's where the Opera House is, and the whales are just moving around in the harbor. And I'm thinking, why do animals sing? And because for whales to find each other in the ocean, or for dogs to establish their locations. It's like their GPS. They're like, I'm over here, I'm 3 miles over there, I'm over the next yard, something like this. And so So it was a short concert, 20 minutes, you know, and there were a lot of dogs there who just wanted to rock. I want to rock. Dogs like this, to rock. And then the sweet ones, my favorite ones, were the droolers, and they're in the front row just like... Because they didn't know what it was, you know. And it wasn't, what is this? So they were super polite the whole time, because they didn't know what it was, they didn't know how to behave. And all those vets from Sydney had parked their vans around there waiting for dogfight or something like this, or any medical problems. Nothing happened. It was just a wonderful show. But at the end of the show, I just said, okay, you dogs, you've been like so quiet, you know, why don't we do like some barking? So how about like all the little dogs, you start barking. Okay, medium dogs come in. Okay, come on, big dogs. And for 5 minutes, these thousands of dogs barked just because they could bark, just for fun. And it was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. And so anyway, I want to thank you for inviting me to come here and having this good time.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.